Hi everyone, welcome back to Mr. Sleepy Crime. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's stories. Story 1. In January 2013, a 21-year-old Canadian student named Elisa Lam arrived in Los Angeles, California. She was on what many young people would consider an adventure of a lifetime, traveling alone down the West Coast, visiting cities like San Diego, Los Angeles, and eventually planning to reach Santa Cruz. She documented her journey on social media, sharing her experiences and observations with friends and family back home in Vancouver. What began as an exciting solo journey would transform into one of the most puzzling and discussed mysteries of the modern era. Within weeks of her arrival in Los Angeles, Elisa would vanish from the historic Cecil Hotel in downtown LA, only to be discovered under the most unusual and troubling circumstances that would generate theories ranging from the tragic but explainable to the wildly supernatural. Elisa Lam was born on April 30, 1991, to parents who had emigrated from Hong Kong to Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Growing up in Vancouver's suburbs, Elisa was described by those who knew her as intelligent, creative, and insightful, someone with a keen mind and a thoughtful perspective on the world around her. At the time of her journey to California, Elisa was a student at the University of British Columbia, studying art history. Friends and classmates remember her as somewhat introverted but warm once you got to know her, someone who observed the world carefully and often expressed herself through writing and photography. Her Tumblr blog, which would later become a source of intense scrutiny, revealed a young woman with varied interests in literature, fashion, and art, along with the common uncertainties and self-exploration that many experience in their early 20s. What many didn't know during her life, but would learn after her death, was that Elisa had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and had been prescribed several medications to help manage her condition. Like many young adults with mental health challenges, she was working to find balance, to pursue her dreams and live independently while managing the complexities of her health. Her parents later shared that she had been responsible about taking her medication and had regular contact with mental health professionals. In January 2013, Elisa embarked on what she called her West Coast tour. She planned to visit San Diego, Los Angeles, Santa Cruz, and San Francisco, traveling alone by bus and staying in budget accommodations. For many young people, such solo travel represents an important rite of passage, a chance to experience independence and self-reliance. Elisa documented the early parts of her journey on social media, posting photos and observations about the places she visited. She began her trip in San Diego, where everything seemed to go as planned. She visited tourist attractions, explored the city, and shared her experiences online. After San Diego, she made her way to Los Angeles, arriving in late January 2013. She checked into the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles on January 26, initially booking a shared room in the hotel's hostel section called the Stay on Main. The choice of the Cecil Hotel would later be scrutinized intensely, as the establishment had a troubled history that Elisa may not have been fully aware of. Built in the 1920s during an economic boom, the Cecil had once been a luxurious destination but had fallen into decline over the decades. By 2013, it had become known for its affordability but also for its location in a challenging area of downtown Los Angeles, the area known as Skid Row, which had significant populations of unhoused individuals and struggled with crime issues. The Cecil also had a dark history that had earned it a particular reputation in Los Angeles. Over the decades, it had been the scene of several suicides, murders, and had even housed infamous serial killers like Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker, in the 1980s. In an attempt to distance itself from this troubled past, parts of the hotel had been rebranded as Stay on Main to appeal to budget travelers like Elisa, though it remained the same building with the same history. Whether Elisa knew of this history is unclear. As a budget traveler in the days before extensive online reviews were common, she may have simply chosen the hotel for its central location and affordable rates. What we do know is that shortly after checking in, Elisa's behavior reportedly began to draw attention. According to later reports from hotel staff, Elisa was initially placed in a shared hostel-style room but was moved to a private room after her roommates complained about some unusual behavior. The exact nature of this behavior was never publicly detailed, but it suggested that something may have been amiss with Elisa early in her stay. During her time in Los Angeles, Elisa visited several tourist destinations. She was known to have taken a tour of the Warner Brothers studio in Burbank on January 31st, and she also visited a bookstore called The Last Bookstore, which she mentioned on social media. These normal tourist activities suggest that at least some of her time in Los Angeles proceeded as planned, the ordinary adventures of a young traveler exploring a new city. Back in Vancouver, Elisa's family had an arrangement with her. She would call them every day to check in, understanding the natural concerns parents might have for a daughter traveling alone. According to her parents, this daily communication was consistent until January 31, 2013. When they didn't hear from her on February 1, they became concerned, as this break in routine was out of character for their reliable daughter. When Elisa failed to contact her family on February 1, 2013, her parents immediately grew concerned. The daily check-ins had been established specifically to ensure her safety while traveling alone, and Elisa had been diligent about maintaining this communication. Her silence was immediately recognized as unusual. On February 1, Elisa was scheduled to check out of the Cecil Hotel and continue her journey to Santa Cruz. When she neither checked out as planned nor contacted her family, her parents reported her missing to the Los Angeles Police Department. Being from another country and unfamiliar with Los Angeles, they felt helpless as they tried to coordinate search efforts from Vancouver. The LAPD began their investigation by visiting the Cecil Hotel. They interviewed staff members, who confirmed that Elisa had not checked out as scheduled and that her belongings were still in her room. This included her laptop, clothing, identification, and other personal items, suggesting that whatever had happened, she had not planned to leave the hotel permanently without her possessions. Police began searching the hotel, including common areas, the roof, and eventually with the aid of search dogs. They distributed flyers with Elisa's photo throughout downtown Los Angeles and reached out to the public for information. Surveillance footage from businesses near the hotel was reviewed, though it's unclear if any sightings of Elisa were found outside the hotel. On February 6, nearly a week after Elisa was last heard from, the LAPD held a press conference about her disappearance and released the last known images of her, surveillance footage from inside the Cecil Hotel that would soon become famous worldwide for its disturbing and perplexing nature. The surveillance video, taken from an elevator security camera on January 31, showed Elisa behaving in ways that many found deeply unsettling. In the roughly 4-minute video, she enters the elevator and presses multiple buttons. The doors fail to close, and what follows is a series of bizarre movements and gestures that have been endlessly analyzed and debated. In the footage, Elisa steps out of the elevator, appears to hide or press herself against the wall, then re-enters. She makes unusual hand gestures, moving her hands in ways that some have described as communicating with an unseen person, while others have suggested they resemble the finger movements of someone experiencing certain types of mental health episodes. At times, she steps out of the elevator again, waving her arms, before returning. Throughout this sequence, the elevator doors remain open, despite her having pressed multiple buttons. Finally, Elisa exits the elevator and appears to walk away down the hallway, after which the elevator doors finally close. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Elisa Lam alive. The release of this video generated enormous public interest in the case. Many viewers found the footage deeply unsettling, and it quickly spread across the internet, spawning countless theories and analyses. Some suggested Elisa appeared to be hiding from someone, while others thought she might be playing a game. Mental health experts noted that her movements could be consistent with certain types of psychiatric episodes, particularly given her known bipolar diagnosis. As days turned into weeks with no sign of Elisa, the investigation continued. Police searched throughout the hotel multiple times, including areas not accessible to guests. They interviewed other hotel residents and staff. Elisa's parents traveled to Los Angeles to appeal for information, holding their own press conference on February 12, where they described their daughter and pleaded for anyone with information to come forward. Throughout this period, hotel guests continued their stays, unaware of the tragedy that was unfolding around them. Some would later report strange occurrences during their stays in mid-February, unusual noises, problems with water pressure, and water that sometimes ran dark or had an odd taste. These complaints would take on a much more disturbing significance in light of what was to come. On February 19, 2013, nearly 3 weeks after Elisa was last seen, maintenance workers at the Cecil Hotel made a shocking discovery that would provide answers but also raise many more questions. Responding to guest complaints about water problems, a worker went to check the hotel's water tanks on the roof. The Cecil Hotel had 4 large water tanks on its roof, each holding up to 1,000 gallons of water that supplied the building. Upon checking these tanks, the worker made the horrifying discovery of Elisa's body floating inside one of them. Her clothes, the same clothes she had been wearing in the elevator video, were floating nearby, separate from her body. Her room key and watch were also found in the tank. This discovery explained the water problems guests had been experiencing. They had unknowingly been using water from the tank containing Elisa's body for drinking, bathing, and brushing their teeth. For many guests, this realization would be deeply traumatizing. The discovery of Elisa's body raised immediate and troubling questions. How had she accessed the roof, which was supposedly secured and alarmed? How had she managed to open the heavy water tank lid, climb inside, and then presumably close it behind her? And perhaps most perplexingly, why would she have done so? Following the discovery of Elisa Lam's body, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office conducted an autopsy to determine the cause of death. On February 21, 2013, the initial autopsy was completed, but the coroner deferred the cause of death pending further tests, including toxicology screening. The investigation now focused on several key questions. How did Elisa access the hotel roof? How did she get into the water tank? Did she act alone, or was someone else involved? Was her death an accident, suicide, or something more sinister? Police investigators carefully examined the route to the roof. According to the hotel's security measures, the door to the roof should have been locked and connected to an alarm that would sound if opened. Additionally, accessing the water tanks themselves presented challenges. They were large, cylindrical containers with heavy lids that would be difficult to move, standing on a platform several feet above the roof surface. However, subsequent investigation revealed troubling gaps in the hotel's security. Reporters who visited the hotel after Elisa's body was found discovered that some of the doors to the roof were occasionally propped open or left unlocked, and the alarm system was not always functioning properly. Former hotel employees later stated that guests sometimes accessed the roof to smoke or take in views of the city, despite rules prohibiting this. Investigators also reviewed additional surveillance footage and conducted extensive interviews with hotel staff and guests. They were particularly interested in determining if Elisa had been alone during the time period captured in the elevator video and whether anyone else had accessed the roof around the same time. On April 19, 2013, nearly 2 months after discovering Elisa's body, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office released their findings. They ruled her death an accidental drowning, with bipolar disorder listed as a significant contributing condition. The toxicology report found traces of her prescribed medications, Wellbutrin, Lamictal, Seroquel, and Effexor, but at levels suggesting she might not have been taking her full dosage in the days before her death. No alcohol or recreational drugs were found in her system. The coroner's report suggested that Elisa's bipolar disorder had played a role in her behavior and ultimate death. They theorized that she may have experienced a manic episode that led to the unusual behavior seen in the elevator video and her eventual access to the roof and water tank. The report noted that bipolar disorder can sometimes involve behaviors such as disrobing, explaining her clothes being found separate from her body, and seeking unusual hiding places during episodes. This official explanation did little to quell public fascination and skepticism about the case. Many questions remained unanswered or inadequately addressed in the minds of observers. How had she managed to open, enter, and then close the heavy tank lid behind her if she was experiencing a mental health crisis? Why hadn't the hotel's security measures prevented access to such a dangerous area? And what explained some of the more unusual aspects of the elevator video? In September 2013, Elisa's parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Cecil Hotel, arguing that the establishment had failed in its duty to make the premises safe and secure for their guests. The lawsuit specifically mentioned the hotel's location in a high-crime area and its history of attracting transients and criminals, suggesting that the hotel should have taken additional security measures. The hotel's defense argued that they could not have reasonably foreseen that someone would access the water tanks, and that they had no legal duty to protect Elisa from the unforeseeable act of entering a water tank on the roof. In 2015, a Los Angeles Superior Court judge dismissed the lawsuit, siding with the hotel's argument that they could not have anticipated such an unusual event. As the legal proceedings unfolded, public interest in the case continued to grow. The unusual circumstances, combined with the disturbing elevator video, made Elisa's story the subject of intense online discussion. Amateur detectives combed through every detail of the case, proposing alternative theories ranging from murder conspiracies to supernatural explanations. Adding to the eerie nature of the case were several coincidences that internet sleuths quickly identified. Perhaps most notably, many pointed out similarities between Elisa's case and the 2005 horror film Dark Water, in which a young woman's body is found in a hotel's water tank, affecting the water quality. Others noted that around the time of Elisa's death, there was a tuberculosis outbreak on Skid Row near the hotel, and a test for tuberculosis happens to be called the LAM Elisa test, a striking coincidence using the letters of her name. These coincidences, while almost certainly nothing more than that, added to the mystique surrounding the case and fueled further speculation. The case became a magnet for conspiracy theories and supernatural explanations, despite the medical examiner's straightforward conclusion of accidental drowning complicated by mental illness. In the years following Elisa Lam's tragic death, her story has continued to resonate with people around the world. What might have been a sad but relatively straightforward case of accidental death complicated by mental illness instead became one of the most discussed and analyzed mysteries of the internet age. The haunting elevator video alone has been viewed millions of times, with new analyses and theories continuing to emerge years after her passing. The Cecil Hotel itself, already infamous before Elisa's death, saw its dark reputation further cemented by this tragedy. In 2017, the Los Angeles City Council designated the building a historic cultural monument, acknowledging its significance in the city's history despite, or perhaps partly because of, its troubled past. Later that same year, the hotel closed for extensive renovations, with plans to reopen as a mix of hotel rooms and residential units, though these plans have faced various delays. Elisa's death also sparked important conversations about mental health, particularly bipolar disorder. Mental health advocates have used her story to highlight the challenges faced by those living with serious mental health conditions, especially when traveling alone or navigating unfamiliar environments without support systems in place. In February 2021, Netflix released a 4-part documentary series titled Crime Scene: The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel, directed by Joe Berlinger. The series examined Elisa's case in detail, featuring interviews with hotel employees, law enforcement officials, journalists, and mental health experts. While the documentary ultimately supported the coroner's conclusion of accidental death, it also explored the online obsession with the case and how internet sleuths sometimes pursued misguided theories that harmed innocent people. One such person was Mexican death metal musician Pablo Vergara, who performed under the name Morbid. Because he had stayed at the Cecil Hotel in the past, though not during Elisa's stay, and had posted dark creative content online, internet detectives falsely accused him of involvement in Elisa's death. He received death threats and experienced a mental health crisis as a result of these unfounded accusations. His experience highlighted the real-world consequences that can result from amateur online investigations. The documentary also addressed the troubled history of the Cecil Hotel and its surroundings, placing Elisa's story in the context of the challenging social conditions of Los Angeles's Skid Row area. It examined how decades of social policy decisions had concentrated poverty, mental illness, and addiction in the neighborhood where the Cecil stands, creating conditions where tragedies of various kinds became more likely. For many who have followed this case closely, the official explanation of accidental drowning during a bipolar episode remains unsatisfying. They point to various details that seem difficult to reconcile with this conclusion: the closed tank lid, the difficulty of accessing the roof, the precisely timed elevator malfunction during her strange behavior, and more. However, mental health experts have noted that during manic episodes, individuals can demonstrate unusual strength, fearlessness, and determination that might explain these seemingly impossible actions. What's often lost in discussions of the mystery surrounding Elisa's death is the very real tragedy of a young life cut short. Elisa Lam was not merely an internet mystery or a subject for amateur detectives. She was a daughter, friend, student, and young woman with hopes, dreams, and a future ahead of her. Her parents have largely maintained their privacy following the legal proceedings, choosing to grieve their daughter away from the public fascination with her final days. Elisa's Tumblr blog, which she titled Ether Fields, continued to post content automatically for months after her death due to scheduled posts she had set up in advance. This digital afterlife created an eerie situation where her thoughts and selected content continued to appear online long after she was gone, providing glimpses into her interests and perspectives while simultaneously reminding readers of her absence. In one of her final Tumblr posts before her death, Elisa quoted Chuck Palahniuk, "The tragedy is not that things are broken. The tragedy is that things are not mended again." These words take on a poignant significance in light of what would happen to her, a young life that would not have the chance to be mended or to realize its full potential. As we reach the conclusion of our exploration of Elisa Lam's story, it's worth reflecting on why this particular case has captured public imagination so powerfully and persistently. Perhaps it's the visual nature of the evidence, that haunting elevator video that allows viewers to see Elisa's final documented moments and form their own interpretations. Perhaps it's the setting of the Cecil Hotel with its long history of tragedy and darkness. Or perhaps it's simply the fundamental human desire to make sense of the seemingly senseless, to find patterns and meaning in events that resist easy explanation. While we may never know with absolute certainty what transpired during Elisa's final hours, the most compassionate approach to her story is one that recognizes the real challenges faced by those living with serious mental health conditions. Bipolar disorder, when not properly managed with medication and support, can indeed lead individuals to perceive reality differently and engage in behaviors that might seem inexplicable to others. The Los Angeles County Coroner's assessment that Elisa experienced a manic episode that led to her accidental drowning is supported by medical evidence, including the subtherapeutic levels of her prescribed medications found in her system. Mental health experts who have reviewed the case have noted that her behavior in the elevator video shows several characteristics consistent with certain types of psychiatric episodes. What remains undeniable is the tragedy of a young life lost, a daughter, sister, friend, and student with her own unique perspectives and contributions to offer the world. Behind the mystery that has fascinated internet sleuths was a real person navigating the challenges of young adulthood while managing a serious mental health condition and traveling alone in an unfamiliar city. Perhaps the most meaningful legacy of Elisa's story would be increased awareness and understanding of mental health issues, particularly the importance of support systems for those traveling while managing such conditions. Her case has prompted some hotels to review their security measures and has highlighted the need for compassionate approaches to mental health crises. For those who continue to be fascinated by unsolved aspects of this case, it's worth remembering that sometimes the most straightforward explanation, even if it doesn't address every question, may indeed be the correct one. The human mind often seeks elaborate or conspiracy-laden explanations when faced with troubling events, sometimes overlooking the simpler realities of human vulnerability and institutional failures. If you're still awake and listening to my voice, and if you or someone you know struggles with mental health challenges, please remember that resources are available. Organizations like the National Alliance on Mental Illness offer support, education, and advocacy for individuals and families affected by mental illness. As we conclude on this case, let the gentle sound of rainfall carry you toward peaceful sleep. May Elisa Lam be remembered not just for the mysterious circumstances of her death, but for the unique individual she was during her life, a young woman with her own voice, perspective, and story that extended far beyond her final days at the Cecil Hotel. If you're still awake and listening, I hope this exploration of Maura Murray's case has been informative while also providing a soothing background for sleep. Please don't forget to comment where you're listening from and the current time in your corner of the world. Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss our daily true crime stories for sleep. Now, let's move on to our next story. Story 2. On a cold, rainy February morning in 2000, in the small community of Shelby, North Carolina, a little girl packed her backpack, left her family home in the middle of the night, and walked along a rural highway. What happened next has remained a mystery for over 2 decades, leaving her family, law enforcement, and an entire community searching for answers. In this story, we'll carefully piece together what is known about Asha's life, the unusual circumstances of her disappearance, and the enduring search to find her. This isn't just a case file, it's the story of a loving family forever changed, a community that has never stopped searching, and a little girl whose name continues to be spoken with hope that someday, answers will be found. Asha Jakia Degree was born on August 5, 1990, in Shelby, North Carolina, a close-knit community of about 20,000 people nestled in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Shelby is the kind of small southern town where families have often lived for generations, where community ties run deep, and where, in many ways, life moves at its own gentle pace. Asha lived with her parents, Harold and Aquila Degree, and her older brother O'Brien in a comfortable home on Oakcrest Street. The Degree family was well respected in their community. Harold and Aquila both worked at local businesses, attended church regularly, and were known for their devotion to their children. The family structure was loving but disciplined, with clear expectations and routines. Those who knew Asha described her as a happy, intelligent child with a bright smile that could light up a room. She was a 4th grader at Falston Elementary School, where she was a good student who enjoyed reading and mathematics. Asha was also somewhat shy and reserved, especially around strangers, a trait that would later make her disappearance all the more perplexing. Asha played basketball at her school, wearing jersey number 44 with pride. Though her team had lost a game the weekend before her disappearance, those who knew her said she didn't seem unusually upset about it. She was a resilient child who generally took life's small disappointments in stride. The Degree household was carefully structured. Asha and O'Brien had consistent bedtimes, limited television privileges, and were not allowed to use the internet unsupervised, fairly typical rules for children their age in the early 2000s. Friends and family emphasized that Harold and Aquila were loving parents who maintained discipline and routine for their children's well-being. Asha shared a bedroom with her brother O'Brien, where she kept her prized possessions, her basketball uniform, favorite books, and a collection of family photos. She had a backpack decorated with characters from the television show, Kids on the Block, that she used for school. This ordinary backpack would later become a critical element in the investigation of her disappearance. In the days leading up to February 14, 2000, nothing in Asha's behavior suggested she was troubled or planning anything unusual. She attended school, participated in basketball practice, completed her homework, and followed her normal routines. The weekend before her disappearance included a family gathering at her grandmother's house, church attendance, and watching a basketball game on television with her family on Sunday evening. The normalcy of these activities has made what happened next all the more difficult to comprehend. There were no obvious warning signs, no clear indications of distress or dissatisfaction. Asha appeared to be a contented 9-year-old girl living within a stable and loving family structure. As with many families, the Degrees had their own special traditions and routines. Asha's mother Aquila would often check on her children multiple times during the night, a habit born of maternal care that would later haunt her. Harold and Aquila took pride in providing stability for their children, with consistent mealtimes, homework periods, and bedtime routines. Sunday, February 13, 2000, followed this familiar pattern. The family returned from church, had lunch, and spent the afternoon together. That evening, they watched a basketball game on television. Asha and O'Brien completed their homework, had baths, laid out their clothes for school the next day, and went to bed at around 8:30 p.m. It was an ordinary Sunday evening in what appeared to be an ordinary American family. What no one could have known was that this ordinary Sunday would be the last day anyone would see Asha at home. The events that would unfold in the early hours of Monday, February 14, Valentine's Day, would transform this ordinary family's life into an enduring mystery that continues to this day. In the early morning hours of Monday, February 14, 2000, an unusual weather system was moving through Cleveland County, North Carolina. A cold rain was falling, and occasional wind gusts rattled windows and tree branches. The temperature hovered around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, about 4 degrees Celsius, cold and uncomfortable, especially for someone not dressed for such conditions. Inside the Degree home on Oakcrest Street, the family slept. Harold Degree had worked a night shift at PPG Industries, a fiberglass manufacturing company, and had arrived home around midnight. He checked on his children, as was his habit, before going to bed himself. Aquila was already asleep, having prepared for her early morning shift at a textile company called Kauai America Manufacturing. At approximately 2:30 a.m., the power in the neighborhood briefly went out due to the weather. Harold awoke and checked on the children again, confirming that both Asha and O'Brien were asleep in their beds. He then returned to sleep. Sometime between 2:30 a.m. and 6:30 a.m., 9-year-old Asha Degree did something that no one who knew her could have anticipated. She got out of bed, retrieved a backpack that she had packed with several sets of clothes, and left her home without waking her parents or brother. The doors were found locked from the inside the next morning, suggesting she may have left through a side door that could be pulled shut to lock automatically. What compelled a shy, 9-year-old girl to leave her warm bed and venture out into a cold, rainy night remains one of the most perplexing aspects of this case. Was she meeting someone? Was she running away? Was she sleepwalking? These questions continue to haunt everyone involved in the investigation. At approximately 6:30 a.m., Aquila Degree awoke to prepare for work. She went to wake her children for school, as she did every weekday morning. When she entered their bedroom, she found O'Brien asleep but Asha's bed empty. Initially thinking Asha might have gone to the bathroom or perhaps to her parents' bedroom, Aquila began looking for her daughter. Within minutes, it became clear that Asha was not in the house. Aquila woke Harold, and together they searched every room, looking in closets, under beds, and in any space where a 9-year-old might hide or fall asleep. They called relatives who lived nearby to see if, for some inexplicable reason, Asha might have gone to their homes. The answer was always the same: no one had seen Asha. Panic began to set in. The Degrees contacted the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office at approximately 6:40 a.m. to report their daughter missing. Deputies arrived quickly and began a search of the home and surrounding area. An all-points bulletin was issued for Asha at 7:30 a.m., and by mid-morning, a full-scale search operation had been launched. As the day progressed, an astonishing piece of information emerged. Asha had not simply vanished from her bed, there were witnesses who had seen her. Between 3:45 a.m. and 4:15 a.m., 2 different truck drivers reported seeing a small girl walking along Highway 18, approximately 1 mile from the Degree home. They described her as wearing a white long-sleeved shirt and white pants. One driver said he saw her walking south along the highway. The other driver, concerned about a child being out alone at that hour in bad weather, turned his truck around to check on her. When he approached, the girl ran off into the woods along the highway. Neither driver had a cell phone, still somewhat uncommon in early 2000, and both continued on their routes, only reporting what they had seen after news of Asha's disappearance was broadcast later that day. Law enforcement officials immediately focused their search efforts on the area of Highway 18 where Asha had been spotted. The implications of these sightings were staggering. Somehow, this 9-year-old girl had walked nearly a mile from her home, in darkness, during rainy and cold conditions, along the shoulder of a highway. For a child described as fearful of dogs and the dark, this behavior seemed completely out of character. Searchers combed the wooded areas along Highway 18 but found no immediate sign of Asha. Family members, friends, church members, and hundreds of community volunteers joined law enforcement in searching fields, woods, and abandoned buildings in the area. The FBI joined the investigation within days, bringing additional resources and expertise. 3 days after Asha's disappearance, on February 17, searchers found items belonging to her along the highway: a pencil, a marker, and a Mickey Mouse hair bow. These items were identified by her family as belonging to Asha, confirming that she had indeed been on that stretch of highway. The discovery of these items raised as many questions as it answered. If Asha had dropped these items while walking, why hadn't searchers found them sooner? Were they possibly placed there after initial searches? And most importantly, what had happened to Asha after she was last seen running into the woods? In the days and weeks following Asha's disappearance, the investigation expanded dramatically. The Cleveland County Sheriff's Office, the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, and the FBI worked together to pursue every possible lead. Hundreds of people were interviewed, including family members, friends, teachers, neighbors, and the truck drivers who had reported seeing Asha. Investigators thoroughly examined the Degree home, finding no signs of forced entry or struggle. They confirmed that the doors had been locked from the inside and that there was no evidence suggesting Asha had been taken from the home against her will. The family's statements about their activities and routines were verified, and nothing indicated any family involvement in Asha's disappearance. Attention turned to understanding why Asha might have left home willingly in such conditions. Investigators looked at her school life, searching for any signs of trouble or distress. They reviewed her schoolwork, spoke with her teachers and classmates, and examined her personal belongings for clues. Nothing indicated that Asha was unhappy at school or experiencing bullying or other problems that might have prompted her to run away. Her basketball coach noted that Asha had been upset after her team lost a game the weekend before her disappearance, but described her reaction as normal disappointment, not unusual distress. Friends and family consistently described Asha as a happy child who showed no signs of significant problems or unhappiness. A significant development came approximately 18 months after Asha's disappearance. In August 2001, construction workers found Asha's backpack buried along Highway 18 in Burke County, about 26 miles north of Shelby. The backpack was wrapped in plastic garbage bags, suggesting it had been deliberately preserved and hidden. Inside were several items of clothing and a book belonging to Asha. The discovery of the backpack raised troubling questions. How had it traveled 26 miles from where Asha was last seen? Why had someone wrapped it in plastic and buried it? The careful preservation suggested that whoever had buried the backpack wanted to protect its contents, possibly to prevent their degradation or to hide evidence. The location, along the same highway where Asha had last been seen walking, suggested a connection to her disappearance rather than a random finding. Investigators processed the backpack and its contents for fingerprints, DNA, and other forensic evidence. The results of these tests have not been publicly disclosed, but the discovery represented a significant piece of physical evidence in a case that had few tangible clues. As the investigation continued, authorities explored numerous theories about what might have happened to Asha. Was she abducted after being seen on Highway 18? Did she willingly get into someone's vehicle? Was she running away from something, or possibly to something or someone? Had she been groomed by an adult who arranged to meet her that night? Each theory had its supporters and detractors among investigators. One aspect of the case that investigators found particularly puzzling was the apparent planning involved in Asha's departure. She had packed her backpack with multiple changes of clothes, suggesting premeditation rather than an impulsive decision. Yet there was no evidence that she had communicated with anyone outside her family about plans to leave, and her family maintained that she had no access to unmonitored phone or internet use. In 2004, investigators released information about a possible vehicle of interest, a dark-colored 1970s model car, possibly a Lincoln Continental or Ford Thunderbird, that might have been seen on Highway 18 around the time of Asha's disappearance. This information came from re-interviews with witnesses who had been in the area that night. In 2015, 15 years after Asha's disappearance, investigators released additional information about items that might be connected to the case. They revealed that a Dr. Seuss book called McElligot's Pool and a white shirt with red lettering were of interest to the investigation. These items had not been in Asha's backpack when it was found, and investigators did not disclose how they knew these items might be connected to the case. In 2016, the FBI announced a new lead in the case. They reported that Asha might have been seen getting into a distinctive vehicle, described as a dark green early 1970s Lincoln Mark IV or Ford Thunderbird with rust around the wheel wells, on the morning of her disappearance. This information came from a re-examination of witness statements and new interviews conducted as part of the ongoing investigation. Throughout the investigation, Asha's parents, Harold and Aquila Degree, remained steadfast in their determination to find their daughter. They maintained a consistent presence in the media, keeping Asha's case in the public eye and cooperating fully with investigators. They have never wavered in their belief that Asha will be found someday. As months turned into years, and years into decades, the search for Asha Degree never truly ended. Each year on February 14th, the anniversary of her disappearance, her family, friends, and community members gather for a walk along the stretch of Highway 18 where she was last seen. This annual event serves both as a memorial and as a reminder that Asha is still missing, still being searched for, still being remembered. The impact of Asha's disappearance on the Shelby community has been profound and enduring. In a small town where many families had lived for generations, where children often played freely outdoors without fear, Asha's case shattered a sense of security and innocence. Parents became more protective of their children, more vigilant about knowing their whereabouts, more conscious of the potential dangers that might lurk even in familiar surroundings. For Asha's immediate family, the pain of her absence has never diminished. Harold and Aquila Degree have spoken publicly about the daily struggle of not knowing what happened to their daughter. In interviews over the years, they have described the challenge of continuing to live and work while carrying the weight of such uncertainty. They have remained in the same house on Oakcrest Street, hoping that if Asha ever finds her way home, she will know where to find them. Asha's brother O'Brien, who was 10 years old when his sister disappeared, has grown up in the shadow of this family tragedy. As an adult, he has participated in the annual walks and other events to keep Asha's memory alive. The impact of losing a sibling under such mysterious circumstances is difficult to quantify, but it has undoubtedly shaped his life in profound ways. In 2008, the community raised funds to erect a billboard along Highway 18 with Asha's picture and information about her case. This billboard, which has been maintained and updated over the years, serves as a constant reminder that Asha is still missing and that someone, somewhere, might have information that could help solve the case. Law enforcement agencies have never classified Asha's case as cold, despite the passage of time. The Cleveland County Sheriff's Office, the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, and the FBI continue to follow up on tips and leads as they come in. Periodically, they conduct new searches of areas of interest, often based on information developed through re-examination of existing evidence or new witness statements. In 2017, one such search took place in an area near where Asha's backpack had been found. FBI agents, along with state and local law enforcement, conducted an extensive search of a property but did not publicly disclose what prompted the search or what, if anything, was found. The continuing allocation of resources to these search efforts underscores the commitment of law enforcement to solving this case. Over the years, Asha's case has received national attention through television programs like America's Most Wanted, Unsolved Mysteries, and various true crime documentary series. These programs have generated new tips and leads, each of which has been investigated, though none has yet led to a resolution of the case. In 2015, the FBI announced a $25,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person or persons responsible for Asha's disappearance. This reward, combined with $20,000 offered by the sheriff's office and private donors, brought the total reward to $45,000. The substantial reward reflects both the seriousness with which authorities continue to view this case and their belief that someone has information that could help solve it. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has worked with forensic artists to create age-progressed images of what Asha might look like as she grew older. These images have been widely distributed in hopes that someone might recognize her, though there have been no confirmed sightings of Asha since the morning she disappeared. As we come to the end of this case, let's reflect on the case of Asha Degree, not just as a mystery to be solved, but as the story of a child whose life continues to matter deeply to those who knew and loved her, and to a community that has never stopped searching for answers. The disappearance of Asha Degree stands as one of the most perplexing missing persons cases in recent history. The circumstances, a shy 9-year-old girl leaving her home in the middle of a cold, rainy night and walking along a highway, seem to defy logical explanation. The lack of a clear motive, the absence of any communication about her plans, and the limited physical evidence have all contributed to the enduring mystery of what happened to Asha. Yet amidst the mystery, there are also elements of hope and resilience. Hope found in the dedication of investigators who continue to pursue leads more than 2 decades later. Hope in the unwavering belief of Asha's parents that one day they will find answers. Hope in the support of a community that has never forgotten one of its youngest members. The resilience of the Degree family stands as a testament to the enduring power of love and faith in the face of profound loss. Harold and Aquila Degree have transformed their personal tragedy into a mission to keep Asha's memory alive and to ensure that other families do not experience similar pain. They have spoken at community events, worked with organizations focused on missing children, and maintained a public presence that has kept Asha's case in the public consciousness. As investigators continue to work on Asha's case, they remain hopeful that advances in forensic technology, particularly in DNA analysis, may someday provide new insights. They also believe that someone, somewhere, has information that could help solve this case, perhaps someone who has carried this knowledge as a burden for many years and might now be ready to come forward. For those of us who never knew Asha personally, her story serves as a powerful reminder of the vulnerability of children and the responsibility we all share to protect them. It reminds us of the importance of community vigilance, of paying attention to the children in our neighborhoods and schools, and of speaking up when something doesn't seem right. As we conclude our exploration of Asha Degree's story, let the gentle sound of rainfall carry us into the next story. May Asha and her family remain in your thoughts, and may they someday find the answers they have sought for so long. Story 3. On a cold February evening in 2004, a 21-year-old nursing student from the University of Massachusetts vanished without a trace after a minor car accident on a rural New Hampshire road. Despite extensive searches, media coverage, and years of investigation, Maura Murray's whereabouts remain unknown to this day. Her case has captured public attention for nearly 2 decades, becoming one of the most discussed missing persons cases in America. Maura Murray was born on May 4, 1982, in Hanson, Massachusetts, a small town about 18 miles southeast of Boston. She grew up in a close-knit family with her parents Fred and Lori Murray, and her siblings. From an early age, Maura displayed remarkable athletic ability and academic promise. She was a star track runner at Whitman-Hanson Regional High School, where she graduated in 2000. Those who knew Maura described her as intelligent, determined, and disciplined. These qualities served her well as she entered adulthood. After high school, Maura was accepted to the United States Military Academy at West Point, a prestigious achievement that spoke to her exceptional capabilities. At West Point, Maura continued her athletic pursuits and maintained good academic standing. However, after 3 semesters, she decided that military life wasn't the path she wanted to pursue. She transferred to the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, where she studied nursing, a career choice that reflected her caring nature and desire to help others. By all accounts, Maura was thriving at UMass. She made the dean's list, worked as a security guard at an art gallery on campus to help pay for school, and maintained a relationship with her high school boyfriend, Billy Roche, who was serving in the military and stationed in Oklahoma. In the months before her disappearance, however, there were indications that Maura may have been experiencing some personal difficulties. Friends later reported that she seemed more withdrawn than usual. She was handling the challenges of a long-distance relationship, the rigorous demands of nursing school, and possibly other undisclosed personal issues. As we explore this case together, it's important to remember that behind every true crime story is a real person with loved ones who continue to search for answers. For Maura's family and friends, the past 17 years have been marked by uncertainty and unanswered questions. The weekend before Maura vanished held several curious incidents that investigators would later scrutinize for clues. On Thursday, February 5, 2004, Maura worked her shift at the campus security desk. According to her supervisor, she received a phone call that left her visibly upset. Maura was so distraught that her supervisor offered to drive her back to her dorm room. The content of this call has never been confirmed. On Saturday, February 7, Maura's father Fred came to visit her at UMass. They spent the day car shopping, as Maura's vehicle, a 1996 Saturn, had been having problems. That evening, Maura borrowed her father's car to attend a small party with friends. While driving back to her dorm around 3:30 a.m., she struck a guardrail, causing about $10,000 in damage to Fred's car. The police were called, and an accident report was filed. Maura was not cited or charged in this incident. On Sunday, Fred and Maura met with insurance agents about the accident. Fred then rented a car and returned to his home in Connecticut, while Maura returned to campus. Before leaving, Fred withdrew $4,000 from various ATMs with the intention of helping Maura get a replacement car. He left most of this money with his daughter. On Monday, February 9th, the day of her disappearance, Maura's activities suggested she was planning some sort of trip. She emailed her professors stating there had been a death in the family and she would be gone for a week. She also called a booking service about renting accommodations in the Bartlett, New Hampshire area. Later investigation revealed there had been no death in her family. Maura packed her car with clothing, toiletries, school textbooks, and some alcohol. She withdrew $280 from an ATM, purchased nearly $40 worth of alcohol, and at some point printed out directions to Burlington, Vermont. Her computer search history showed she had looked up directions to the Berkshires and Burlington, Vermont, but not to Bartlett, New Hampshire, where she had inquired about lodging. What Maura didn't do that day is equally important. She didn't tell any friends or family members where she was going. She didn't mention her plans to her boyfriend Billy, with whom she had spoken the previous night. She packed as if for a short trip, not as if she were leaving permanently. And she did not respond to an email from her boyfriend that was sent that afternoon. These seemingly contradictory actions have fueled much speculation about Maura's state of mind and intentions. Was she planning a brief getaway to clear her head? Was she meeting someone? Or was she dealing with something more serious? Let's take a moment to reflect on these questions as we continue with our gentle exploration of this case. On the evening of Monday, February 9, 2004, at approximately 7:27 p.m., a local resident in Haverhill, New Hampshire, called the police to report a car accident on Route 112, also known as Wild Amanuset Road. This rural, winding road runs through the small town of Haverhill in the White Mountains region, about 140 miles north of Amherst. The caller, Butch Atwood, was a school bus driver who lived near the accident site. While returning home in his school bus, he noticed a black Saturn sedan had gone off the road and was facing the wrong direction in a sharp curve known locally as the UMass hairpin turn. The car had struck a tree and was disabled. Atwood stopped his bus and spoke briefly with the young woman driving the vehicle. He later identified this woman as Maura Murray. According to Atwood, Maura appeared shaken but not seriously injured. She had a small cut on her face, possibly from the deployment of the airbag. When Atwood offered to call for help, Maura reportedly declined, saying she had already called AAA. This was puzzling because cell phone reception in that area was notoriously poor, and later investigation showed no record of a call to AAA from Maura's phone. Concerned for the young woman's safety in the cold February night, Atwood continued to his home approximately 100 yards away and called the police to report the accident. This call was logged at 7:27 p.m. Meanwhile, another neighbor reported seeing the Saturn's lights on and a figure moving around the vehicle. Police arrived at the scene at approximately 7:46 p.m., roughly 19 minutes after Atwood's call. When they arrived, they found the Saturn locked, with some minor damage to the front end and driver's side. The windshield was cracked on the driver's side where Maura's head had apparently struck it. The airbags had deployed. A box of wine was found inside the car, and there was evidence that wine had been spilled on the driver's side door and seat. What police didn't find was any sign of Maura Murray. In less than 20 minutes between Atwood's interaction with her and the police arrival, Maura had vanished. There were no footprints in the snow leading away from the vehicle, though the ground was partially frozen, which could have made it difficult to leave tracks. Inside the car, police found several personal items belonging to Maura: clothing, toiletries, college textbooks, and printed MapQuest directions to Burlington, Vermont. They also found an empty beer bottle and the box of wine with some of its contents spilled. Not found were Maura's cell phone, credit cards, or the black backpack she was known to carry. Also missing was the $4,000 in cash that her father had given her just days before. Officers on the scene initially treated the situation as a routine case of a driver leaving the scene of an accident, possibly to avoid a DUI charge due to the presence of alcohol in the vehicle. It wasn't until the following day, when Maura failed to contact her family or return to campus, that police began to treat her disappearance as a missing persons case. When Maura's family was notified of the abandoned car the next day, they were immediately concerned. This behavior was completely out of character for Maura, who was responsible and maintained regular contact with her family. Her father Fred, who had just seen her that weekend, was particularly alarmed. The initial search began on Tuesday, February 10th, focusing on the immediate area surrounding the crash site. New Hampshire Fish and Game officers, along with local and state police, conducted ground searches of the nearby woods and roadways. Tracking dogs were brought in to attempt to pick up Maura's scent, but they lost her trail a short distance from the car, near the intersection of Route 112 and Bradley Hill Road. This is a significant detail that has perplexed investigators. The dogs losing her scent so quickly suggested that Maura may have entered another vehicle. But who would have picked her up on that cold, dark night on a rural road? And why hasn't that person ever come forward? As days passed without any sign of Maura, the search expanded. Helicopter units equipped with thermal imaging technology scanned the dense woods surrounding the area. Dive teams searched nearby bodies of water, including the wild Ammonoosuc River, which runs parallel to Route 112. Local residents were interviewed, and houses and outbuildings in the vicinity were checked. Meanwhile, Maura's family arrived in New Hampshire and began their own search efforts. They distributed flyers throughout the region, spoke with local residents, and pleaded for information through the media. Fred Murray was particularly vocal about his concerns that his daughter might have been harmed, possibly after accepting a ride from a stranger. One challenge for both family and investigators was determining where exactly to focus their search efforts. Without knowing Maura's intentions or destination, it was difficult to narrow down where she might have gone. The mystery deepened when investigators discovered that Maura had researched directions to several locations in Vermont and Massachusetts, but ended up in New Hampshire, where she had crashed. Within the first week, the FBI joined the investigation, providing additional resources and expertise. However, despite the combined efforts of multiple law enforcement agencies, search and rescue teams, volunteers, and Maura's determined family members, no definitive trace of Maura Murray was found. As time passed, the searches continued but became less frequent and extensive. The lack of new evidence or leads made it increasingly difficult to know where to look. For Maura's family, this period was marked by frustration, anxiety, and growing fear about what might have happened to their loved one. As weeks turned into months, investigators began to examine Maura's life more closely, looking for clues that might explain her disappearance. They interviewed her friends, classmates, and coworkers. They examined her computer and phone records. They delved into her personal history, looking for any patterns or relationships that might be relevant. Several interesting details emerged from this deeper investigation. For one, investigators discovered that in the days before her disappearance, Maura had searched online for information about pregnancy and alcohol effects on babies. This led to speculation that she might have been pregnant, though this has never been confirmed and her family has disputed this theory. Investigators also looked into Maura's financial situation. They found that while she had withdrawn money from her account before leaving, she hadn't emptied it completely. Her credit cards showed no activity after her disappearance. This suggested that if Maura had planned to start a new life somewhere else, she had done so without accessing her main financial resources. Another avenue of investigation involved Maura's internet activity. In the days before she vanished, she had searched for directions to Burlington, Vermont and information about the Berkshires in Massachusetts. She had also made a phone call to a condominium complex in Bartlett, New Hampshire. These scattered locations suggested she might have been considering multiple destinations, but didn't provide a clear answer as to where she was ultimately heading. Police also carefully examined Maura's relationship with her boyfriend, Billy Roche. By all accounts, they had a normal relationship with the usual ups and downs of any long-distance couple. Billy was stationed in Oklahoma at the time of Maura's disappearance and immediately received permission to leave his post to join the search in New Hampshire. No evidence has ever linked him to her disappearance. One particularly mysterious element of the case involved a voicemail left on Fred Murray's cell phone on the Wednesday after Maura disappeared. Fred heard what he believed was the sound of whimpering or crying, which he thought might have been Maura. Phone records confirmed the call came from Maura's phone, but the identity of the caller has never been determined, and some investigators have questioned whether the sounds were even human. The investigation also revealed that Maura had been dealing with some personal challenges in the months before she vanished. In addition to the academic pressures of nursing school and maintaining a long-distance relationship, she had been involved in a minor legal issue. In November 2003, she had been caught using a stolen credit card number to order food. The charges were continued without a finding, meaning they would be dismissed after a probationary period if she stayed out of trouble. As investigators pieced together these various elements of Maura's life, they developed several theories about what might have happened to her. Over the years, several theories have emerged regarding Maura Murray's disappearance. Each has its proponents and detractors, and none has been definitively proven or disproven. Let's explore these theories while maintaining our calm, measured tone. The first theory is that Maura deliberately disappeared to start a new life. Supporters of this theory point to her careful preparations before leaving UMass, including emailing her professors and packing personal items. They suggest that the stresses in her life, academic pressure, relationship issues, and legal troubles, may have motivated her to seek a fresh start elsewhere, perhaps in Canada, which is relatively close to where her car was found. However, this theory has significant weaknesses. Maura left behind her cell phone charger in her dorm room and didn't take all of her money. She maintained close relationships with her family, particularly her father. And in the 17 years since her disappearance, she has never contacted any family members or friends, nor has she used her social security number for employment or other official purposes. A second theory is that Maura may have wandered away from the accident scene, became disoriented in the cold, and succumbed to the elements. February in New Hampshire can be brutally cold, with temperatures well below freezing, especially at night. If Maura was injured from the accident or had been drinking, she might have become disoriented and walked into the woods, where she could have developed hypothermia. The challenge with this theory is that despite extensive searches of the surrounding area, no trace of Maura has ever been found. Search and rescue experts have noted that even after many years, some evidence of her presence, clothing, personal items, or remains, would likely have been discovered if she had died in the woods near the crash site. A third theory, and one that Maura's father Fred has consistently advocated, is that Maura encountered foul play after leaving her vehicle. Perhaps she accepted a ride from a passing motorist who then harmed her. The rural location, the darkness, and the fact that she was stranded would have made her vulnerable. The dogs losing her scent near the road supports the idea that she entered another vehicle. Over the years, several individuals in the area have come under scrutiny. Local resident Butch Atwood, who spoke with Maura at the scene, was initially considered a person of interest but was later cleared. Other local residents have been investigated as well, but no charges have ever been filed in connection with Maura's disappearance. In the years since Maura vanished, there have been occasional developments in the case. In 2006, a man claimed to have seen a young woman resembling Maura running on Route 112 the night of her disappearance. In 2012, a bone fragment was found near the crash site but was later determined not to be human. In 2019, soil samples were taken from a basement in a house near the crash site, but the results have not been publicly disclosed. The case has also generated significant public interest. Multiple podcasts, documentaries, and books have explored the mystery of what happened to Maura Murray. Online communities dedicated to solving the case have formed, analyzing every detail and developing their own theories. Despite the passage of time, efforts to find Maura Murray continue. Her family, particularly her father Fred, has never stopped searching for answers. Fred has repeatedly criticized what he perceives as inadequacies in the initial investigation and has continued to press authorities to do more. In 2017, on the 13th anniversary of Maura's disappearance, the New Hampshire State Police held a press conference to review the case. They revealed that they had received over 1,500 tips since Maura's disappearance and had conducted numerous searches, but they acknowledged that the case remained unsolved. In 2019, the FBI joined New Hampshire State Police in searching a home near the crash site. Ground-penetrating radar was used, and soil samples were taken from the basement. While the results of these tests have not been publicly disclosed, the fact that such a search was conducted indicates that the investigation remains active. Maura's case has also been kept alive through various media efforts. The podcast, Missing Maura Murray, has examined the case in detail, interviewing witnesses and exploring various theories. The documentary series, The Disappearance of Maura Murray on Oxygen brought renewed attention to the case in 2017. Books such as True Crime Addict, by James Renner have also explored the mystery. For Maura's family, the years without answers have been extraordinarily difficult. While they have never given up hope of finding Maura alive, they have also had to face the possibility that they may never know what happened to her. The not knowing, the ambiguous loss, can be particularly painful to endure. As we come to the end of our exploration of this mysterious case, it's worth reflecting on the human impact of unsolved disappearances. Behind the theories, the investigations, and the media coverage is a real young woman who had dreams, aspirations, and loved ones who continue to miss her deeply. If you're still awake, please don't forget to comment where you're listening from and the current time in your corner of the world. Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss our daily true crime stories for sleep. Now, let's move on to our next story. Story 4. The Santa Monica Mountains rise above the Pacific Ocean, creating a dramatic landscape of steep canyons and hidden valleys. Within this wilderness lies the community of Monte Nido, a small collection of homes nestled among the oak trees and chaparral. It was here, at a restaurant called Jeffrey's, that our story begins on a warm September evening in 2009. Mitris Richardson was 24 years old, a beautiful young woman with a bright future ahead of her. A recent graduate of Cal State Fullerton with a degree in psychology, she was planning to pursue a career as a therapist. Those who knew her described her as vibrant, intelligent, and kind. But what happened to Mitris that September night would spark a controversy that continues to this day, raising questions about police procedures, mental health protocols, and the responsibilities we have to those who may be experiencing crisis. Before we follow Mitris' journey on that fateful night, let's understand a bit more about the area where these events unfolded. The Santa Monica Mountains create a natural divide between the Los Angeles Basin and the Conejo Valley. The terrain is rugged, with steep slopes covered in dense chaparral vegetation that can easily disorient hikers who venture off established trails. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department's Lost Hills Station serves this area, a facility located in Agora Hills, about 5 miles inland from the coast. It's an area of stark contrasts. Million-dollar homes with ocean views stand just miles from virtually uninhabited wilderness where mountain lions roam freely. Mitris Richardson grew up in the Los Angeles area, primarily raised by her mother Latice Sutton and her grandmother. She had graduated with honors from Cal State Fullerton, where she had been recognized for her academic achievements. Friends knew her as responsible and level-headed. She volunteered with programs helping disadvantaged youth and was active in her community. The day before the incident, September 16, 2009, Mitris had been behaving normally according to those who interacted with her. She had spoken with family members, attended a beauty salon appointment, and made plans for the coming weekend. Nothing suggested anything unusual was about to occur. That Wednesday evening, Mitris drove her Honda Civic along the Pacific Coast Highway, eventually turning onto Malibu Canyon Road. Around 7 p.m., she arrived at Jeffrey's, an upscale seafood restaurant perched on the cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean. She came alone and was seated at a table. What happened inside the restaurant would later be pieced together through statements from staff and other diners. Mitris began to act erratically. She approached other diners' tables, telling one group that she was from Mars. She spoke about being there to avenge Michael Jackson's death. The restaurant staff became concerned when it came time to pay her $89 bill, and Mitris couldn't produce payment. The restaurant manager, concerned both about the bill and Mitris' mental state, called the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Deputies arrived around 8:30 p.m. They found Mitris' car in the parking lot, containing her purse, ID, and phone. They also discovered a small amount of marijuana in the vehicle. Deputies determined that while Mitris was acting unusually, she did not meet the criteria for an involuntary psychiatric hold under California's Section 5150 law. Instead, they arrested her for defrauding an innkeeper and possession of marijuana. As Mitris was taken into custody, the restaurant manager asked deputies if they could simply hold her overnight for her own safety, given her unusual behavior. The deputies explained that they could only do that if she met specific criteria for a psychiatric detention, which they had determined she did not. Around 10 p.m., Mitris arrived at the Lost Hills Sheriff Station. She was booked, processed, and placed in a holding cell. Meanwhile, her mother Latice Sutton received a call from the restaurant about the incident. Concerned, she called the sheriff's station around 11 p.m. According to Latice, she asked if they could hold Mitris until morning when she could drive out to pick her up. She was reportedly told that Mitris was an adult and would be released on her own recognizance once processing was complete. Latice says she specifically asked if Mitris would be held until morning, and was told yes. However, at 12:38 a.m. on September 17, having been determined not to be intoxicated and with her booking process complete, Mitris was released from custody. She had no car, no phone, no purse, and no money. The sheriff's station was located in a remote area, surrounded by dark, mountainous terrain, with no public transportation available at that hour. When Mitris walked out of the Lost Hills Sheriff's Station shortly after midnight, she disappeared into the darkness. The station's security cameras captured her walking out the front door, but what happened after that would remain unknown for many months. What we do know is that around 6:30 a.m., about 6 hours after her release, a resident in the Monte Nido area, approximately 7 miles from the sheriff's station, reported seeing a young woman resembling Mitris in their backyard. The resident called the sheriff's department, but by the time deputies arrived, the woman was gone. This sighting suggested that Mitris had somehow made her way on foot through the dark, unfamiliar canyon terrain. Based on the timeline and location, she would have been walking through the night along dangerous, winding roads with steep drops and no streetlights. When Latice arrived at the station later that morning to pick up her daughter as she had planned, she was shocked to learn that Mitris had been released hours earlier. This began what would become an agonizing search for the young woman. The search for Mitris Richardson began in earnest on September 17. Family members, friends, and volunteers gathered to comb the areas around the Lost Hills Station and Monte Nido. Sheriff's deputies joined the search, using helicopters to scan the rugged terrain. Missing person flyers with Mitress's photo were distributed throughout the area. Days passed with no sign of Mitress. Her disappearance began to attract media attention, particularly as questions arose about the decision to release her in the middle of the night in such a remote location. Civil rights activists joined the family in questioning whether Mitress, as a young African-American woman, had received appropriate care from law enforcement. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department defended their actions, stating that they had followed proper protocols. They noted that Mitress had been offered the opportunity to remain in jail until morning but had declined. However, this contradicted what family members said they had been told when they called the station. As weeks turned into months, the search continued. Mitress's family organized regular search parties, often focusing on the area near the Monte Nido sighting. The case became increasingly high-profile, with the Los Angeles Times and local television stations covering the story extensively. In November 2009, 2 months after Mitress's disappearance, the family filed a negligence lawsuit against the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, alleging that deputies should never have released a possibly mentally ill young woman into a remote area in the middle of the night. The lawsuit brought increased scrutiny to the case. The Los Angeles Police Department joined the investigation, as questions arose about jurisdiction and whether the Sheriff's Department could objectively investigate a case in which they might bear some responsibility. Throughout the winter and spring of 2010, periodic searches continued, but no trace of Mitress was found. Her family never gave up hope, continuing to pressure authorities and keep the case in the public eye. Then, in June 2010, detectives found evidence that Mitress may have been spotted in Las Vegas. Security camera footage from a hotel appeared to show someone resembling Mitress. For a brief moment, there was hope that she might be found alive. However, further investigation determined that the woman in the footage was not Mitress. On August 9, 2010, nearly 11 months after Mitress's disappearance, park rangers conducting an unrelated marijuana eradication operation in Dark Canyon, a remote area of the Santa Monica Mountains about 8 miles from the Lost Hills Sheriff Station, made a grim discovery. They found human remains in a creek bed, scattered across a small area, partially mummified due to the dry conditions. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office used dental records to identify the remains as those of Mitress Richardson. The discovery raised as many questions as it answered. Dark Canyon was extremely remote, accessible only by hiking several miles on unmaintained trails. How had Mitress ended up there? And why hadn't previous searches located her? Adding to the controversy, the Sheriff's Department removed the remains before the coroner's investigators could conduct a full on-site examination, a breach of protocol that was later harshly criticized. They claimed they were concerned about scavenging animals and the approaching darkness, but the decision compromised the forensic integrity of the scene. The coroner's office was unable to determine a cause of death due to the condition of the remains. There were no signs of trauma that would indicate foul play, but the advanced decomposition made a definitive determination impossible. The manner of death was listed as undetermined. In the years following the discovery of Mitress remains, her case continued to raise questions and inspire calls for changes in how law enforcement handles individuals who may be experiencing mental health crises. In 2011, Los Angeles County agreed to pay Mitress's family $900,000 to settle their lawsuit. While the county did not admit wrongdoing, the settlement acknowledged the tragedy of the situation. The California Attorney General's office conducted a review of the Sheriff Department's handling of the case, particularly the removal of Mitress remains from the discovery site. They concluded that while protocols had been violated, there was no evidence of criminal intent. In 2016, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department officially reopened the investigation into Mitress's death. Sheriff Jim McDonnell, who had not been in office during the original events, stated that advances in technology might provide new insights. However, this reinvestigation did not yield any definitive conclusions. Mitra's mother, Lottie Sutton, established the Mitras Richardson Foundation, dedicated to advocating for changes in how law enforcement handles cases involving individuals in apparent mental distress. The foundation works to educate both police officers and the public about mental health awareness. Today, the case of Mitras Richardson stands as a somber reminder of the potential consequences when systems designed to protect vulnerable individuals fail. Her story has helped bring about changes in policies regarding the release of individuals from custody, particularly those who may be experiencing mental health issues. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department now has more comprehensive protocols for evaluating the mental health of individuals in custody and making release decisions. Deputies receive additional training in recognizing signs of mental distress. Mitra's family continues to honor her memory through advocacy work. On the anniversaries of her disappearance and the discovery of her remains, they often hold memorial events that double as mental health awareness campaigns. The rugged canyons of the Santa Monica Mountains hold their secrets close. While we may never know exactly what happened to Mitras during her final hours, her story has touched many lives and brought important issues of mental health care, law enforcement protocols, and racial equity in the justice system to the forefront of public consciousness. As the rain continues to fall, take this moment to reflect on the fragility of life and the importance of compassion for those experiencing crisis. Though Mitra's life ended tragically, her legacy lives on in the changes her story has inspired. Story 5. Keddie, California sits nestled in Plumas County, about 85 miles northwest of Reno, Nevada. In the early 1900s, it was established as a railroad stop, named after railroad man Arthur W. Keddie. By the 1930s, it had transformed into a resort destination, with a beautiful lodge and surrounding cabins that attracted vacationers seeking escape in the mountains. But by 1981, the year our story takes place, the Keddie Resort had fallen into disrepair. The once pristine cabins had become rentals, mostly occupied by working-class families and individuals drawn by the affordable prices and natural beauty of the Feather River Canyon. The small community numbered fewer than 200 residents, many of whom knew each other well, the kind of place where neighbors borrowed sugar and kept an eye on each other's children. Cabin 28 was a modest structure, with 3 bedrooms, a living room, and a kitchen. It sat among the pine trees, not far from the main lodge, with a small front porch facing the dirt road that wound through the resort grounds. By April 1981, it was home to 36-year-old Glenna, Sue Sharp and her 5 children. Sue Sharp had moved to Keddie just months earlier, in November 1980, seeking a fresh start after separating from her husband. A dedicated mother, Sue worked hard to provide for her children, 15-year-old John, 14-year-old Sheila, 13-year-old Tina, 10-year-old Rick, and 5-year-old Greg. The family had previously lived in Connecticut before relocating to Quincy, California and eventually settling in Keddie. Despite financial struggles, friends and neighbors described Sue as resilient and warm-hearted. She made ends meet through odd jobs and was known to welcome her children's friends into their home. John, her oldest son, was protective of his siblings and mother, a responsible young man who enjoyed outdoor activities. Sheila was a typical teenage girl with dreams of her own future. Young Tina was described as sweet and creative, while the younger boys, Rick and Greg, were energetic children who made friends easily in their new community. Life in Keddie offered simple pleasures. The surrounding forests provided endless exploration opportunities for the children. The nearby Feather River cut through the canyon, its cold, clear waters teeming with fish. On weekends, the Sharp children would often play with others from neighboring cabins, forming the kinds of friendships that develop naturally in small communities. On Saturday, April 11, 1981, spring was beginning to transform the landscape around Keddie. Wildflowers dotted the forest floor, and the days were growing longer. For the Sharp family, it was an ordinary weekend. Sue had been looking for steadier employment, and the children were enjoying their school break. That evening, John invited his friend, 17-year-old Dana Wingate, to stay over. Dana lived in Quincy, a slightly larger town about 7 miles away, where most of the Keddy children attended school. The boys had become friends, both sharing an interest in the outdoors. That same day, Sheila had been invited to a sleepover at the Seabolt family's home in nearby Cabin 27. As darkness fell over the Sierra Nevada mountains that Saturday evening, no one could have imagined the horror that would unfold in the quiet confines of Cabin 28. Saturday, April 11th began like many others for the Sharp family. Sue woke early, as was her habit, to prepare breakfast for her children. The morning was crisp, with sunlight filtering through the pine trees surrounding Cabin 28. The younger boys, Rick and Greg, were excited about watching Saturday morning cartoons, while Tina helped her mother with household chores. John had made plans with his friend Dana Wingate to hang out that day. Dana, a tall, athletic teenager with dark hair, arrived at the cabin around midday. The two boys spent part of the afternoon working on John's bicycle in the yard, their laughter occasionally drifting through the open windows of the cabin. Sheila, looking forward to her sleepover with the Seabolt family in Cabin 27, packed an overnight bag with typical teenage care, selecting which clothes and personal items to bring. Sue reminded her to be back by Sunday afternoon to help with laundry, a regular weekend chore for the family. Throughout the day, neighbors reported seeing the Sharp family going about their normal routines. One neighbor recalled waving to Sue as she hung laundry on a line behind the cabin. Another remembered seeing John and Dana walking along the road that led toward the resort's main lodge. As evening approached, Sue prepared dinner for the family. Tina set the table while Rick and Greg argued playfully over a board game in the living room. The meal was simple: spaghetti with meat sauce, a family favorite that Sue could prepare economically for her large family and guests. After dinner, around 8 p.m., Sheila left for her sleepover at the Seabolt's cabin just down the path. She hugged her mother goodbye, completely unaware that this would be their final farewell. Mrs. Seabolt later recalled that Sheila arrived in good spirits, bringing a few records she wanted to play for her friend. Back at Cabin 28, Sue settled in the living room with the younger children to watch television. John and Dana decided to walk to the resort's small general store about a quarter-mile away to buy sodas. The store's proprietor would later confirm that the boys had visited around 8:30 p.m., purchasing drinks and chatting briefly before heading back to the cabin. By 9:30 p.m., the younger boys, Rick and Greg, were put to bed in their room. Tina soon followed, retiring to the bedroom she shared with her mother. Sue remained in the living room with John and Dana, who were playing cards at the coffee table. A small television played in the background, a local station that would soon sign off for the night, as was common in rural areas in the early 1980s. The last confirmed sighting of any of the family members came around 10 p.m. when a neighbor walking his dog passed by Cabin 28 and noticed the lights were still on. He reported hearing the sound of laughter from inside, a normal, peaceful Saturday night scene that gave no indication of the horror that would unfold in the hours to come. Outside, the April night grew chilly, typical of spring in the high Sierra Nevada. Stars appeared in the clear mountain sky, visible between the towering pines that surrounded the cabin. The resort grew quiet as most residents retired for the evening. In Cabin 27, Sheila and her friend eventually fell asleep after talking long into the night about school, boys, and their dreams for the future. What happened next in Cabin 28 would remain one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in California criminal history. Sunday morning, April 12, 1981, dawned bright and clear over the Keddy Resort. Birds sang in the pines, and the morning sun cast long shadows across the dirt paths between the cabins. At approximately 7:45 a.m., 14-year-old Sheila Sharp left her friend's cabin to return home. She had promised her mother she would help with Sunday chores, and Sue was strict about responsibilities. As Sheila approached cabin 28, she noticed something unusual: the front door was partially open. This struck her as odd. Her mother always insisted on keeping doors locked at night. Calling out as she entered, Sheila received no response. The television was on, its volume low, broadcasting morning programming to an apparently empty room. What Sheila encountered next would forever change her life and haunt her dreams for decades to come. In the living room of cabin 28 lay three bodies: her mother Sue, her brother John, and his friend Dana Wingate. The scene was one of unimaginable violence. All three victims had been bound with electrical wire and medical tape. They had been stabbed repeatedly and showed signs of having been beaten with multiple weapons, including a hammer and a knife. Sheila's screams brought neighbors running. Among the first to arrive were the Seabolts, who had just watched the teenager leave their cabin moments before. Mr. Seabolt immediately ordered everyone out of the cabin and ran to call the police from the resort's main office. Plumas County Sheriff's deputies arrived within 20 minutes. The first officer on the scene, Steve Humphrey, would later describe it as the most horrific crime scene he had encountered in his career. Blood spatter analysis would eventually indicate that the victims had fought desperately for their lives. The extreme violence suggested rage rather than a calculated crime. As officers secured the scene, they made another discovery that added to the horror of the situation. In a separate bedroom, they found Rick and Greg Sharp, along with another boy named Justin Smart who had been staying overnight. Remarkably, all three boys were alive and unharmed, apparently having slept through the brutal attack in the next room. Justin was the 12-year-old son of the Sharps' neighbors in cabin 26. The children were quickly removed from the scene and taken to a secure location where child welfare workers could attend to them. Meanwhile, as investigators began processing the crime scene, they realized something else disturbing: 13-year-old Tina Sharp was nowhere to be found. An immediate search of the resort grounds and surrounding forest yielded no sign of the missing girl. Her disappearance added another layer of mystery and urgency to the already complex investigation. Had she fled during the attack? Had she been abducted? These questions would haunt investigators for years to come. News of the murders spread quickly through the small community of Keddie, sending shockwaves of fear through the resort and surrounding towns. Most residents had left their doors unlocked, feeling safe in their remote mountain community. That sense of security was shattered in a single night. The Plumas County Sheriff's Department, ill-equipped to handle a crime of this magnitude, requested assistance from the California Department of Justice. Soon, forensic experts and additional detectives arrived to process the increasingly complex crime scene. Investigators determined that the murders had likely occurred between midnight and 2 a.m. on Sunday morning. The position of the bodies and evidence of struggle indicated that Sue Sharp had likely been attacked first, with John and Dana possibly coming to her defense. The murder weapons, believed to be a hammer, knife, and possibly other implements, were not found at the scene. The three young boys who had been asleep in the bedroom during the attack were interviewed carefully by specialists. 6-year-old Greg Sharp could provide little information, having slept soundly through the night. 10-year-old Rick Sharp recalled hearing muffled noises but had assumed it was his mother watching television. It was Justin Smart, the neighbor's son, who provided the most intriguing, and ultimately controversial, testimony. Justin claimed to have awakened during the night and witnessed portions of the attack through a partially open bedroom door. He described seeing two men attacking Sue, John, and Dana. However, his account contained inconsistencies and details that changed over multiple tellings, leading some investigators to question its reliability. Child psychologists noted that the boy might have been incorporating details he overheard after the fact or creating a narrative to cope with the trauma. As the investigation continued, the search for Tina Sharp intensified. Hundreds of volunteers combed the forests and canyons around Keddie. Divers searched the Feather River. Missing person bulletins were distributed throughout California and neighboring states. Yet despite these efforts, Tina remained missing. Days turned into weeks with few leads. The community remained on edge, with many families choosing to leave the resort altogether. The once peaceful mountain retreat had become synonymous with unspeakable violence. In the weeks following the murders, the investigation expanded in multiple directions. Detectives interviewed dozens of Keddie residents and individuals from surrounding communities. They explored various potential motives, from robbery gone wrong to personal vendettas against the Sharp family. One of the first persons of interest was Martin Smart, the stepfather of Justin Smart, who had been staying in the Sharp cabin that night. Smart lived in cabin 26 with his wife Marilyn and Justin. During initial interviews, investigators noted inconsistencies in Smart's statements about his whereabouts on the night of the murders. Smart claimed to have been at home with his friend John Boubade, a man with alleged connections to organized crime in Chicago who was staying with the Smart family at the time. Both men reported watching television and turning in around midnight. However, several witnesses reported seeing both men out later that evening, including at the resort's bar. Further raising suspicions, Marilyn Smart told investigators that her husband had been angry with Sue Sharp, believing Sue had been encouraging Marilyn to leave their troubled marriage. Additionally, Martin Smart reported a hammer missing from his tool collection around the time of the murders, a hammer that matched the type of weapon believed to have been used in the attack. Despite these suspicious circumstances, investigators lacked physical evidence directly linking Smart or Boubade to the crimes. Both men submitted to polygraph examinations with inconclusive results. Shortly after the murders, both Smart and Boubade left Keddie, with Smart and Marilyn divorcing soon afterward. Another avenue of investigation focused on known criminal elements in Plumas County. The early 1980s saw significant drug trafficking through the remote mountain regions of Northern California. Some theorized that Sue Sharp might have witnessed something she shouldn't have, or that her cabin was mistakenly targeted in a drug-related conflict. The investigation was hampered by several factors. The crime scene, while initially secured, had not been processed with the thoroughness that would be standard in later decades. Forensic techniques were more limited in 1981, with DNA analysis still years away from being a standard investigative tool. Additionally, the remote location and small local sheriff's department meant resources were stretched thin. As months passed with no arrests, the case began to cool. The Sharp family's surviving children were placed with relatives. Cabin 28 stood empty, becoming an eerie reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. Eventually, the resort's owners boarded it up, unable to rent it to new tenants as its reputation had become too notorious. The most heartbreaking aspect of the case remained the missing Tina Sharp. For 3 years, her fate remained unknown, leaving her siblings and extended family in agonizing limbo. Then, in April 1984, a breakthrough finally came. A forest worker discovered human remains near Camp 18, a remote area in Butte County, approximately 100 miles from Keddie. Through dental records, the remains were identified as those of Tina Sharp. The discovery provided some closure but raised more questions than it answered. How had Tina ended up so far from Keddie? Had she been transported alive? And why had her body been disposed of separately from the other victims? Medical examiners determined that Tina had likely been deceased for the full 3 years since her disappearance, suggesting she had been killed shortly after being taken from cabin 28. Due to the condition of the remains, the exact cause of death could not be determined. The discovery of Tina's remains briefly reinvigorated the investigation, but substantial new leads failed to materialize. By the mid-1980s, the case had officially gone cold, though it was never formally closed. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, various sheriffs and detectives would occasionally revisit the Keddie murders, reviewing old evidence and conducting new interviews. Several promising leads emerged, only to fizzle out upon closer examination. Meanwhile, the community of Keddie itself began to fade away. In 2004, in a development that struck many as symbolic, the new owners of the Keddie resort demolished Cabin 28. They cited the structure's deterioration as the reason, but locals knew the cabin's dark history had made it an unwanted reminder of the resort's tragic past. By then, most of the original cabins had been torn down, and the resort that had once been a vacation destination had essentially ceased to exist. For decades, the Keddie murders remained one of California's most notorious cold cases. The survivors of the Sharp family grew up carrying the weight of that tragic night. Sheila Sharp, who had discovered the bodies, spent years in therapy dealing with the trauma of what she had witnessed. Rick and Greg Sharp were raised by relatives, growing up in the shadow of their family's tragedy. Then, in 2013, more than 30 years after the murders, the case saw new life. A sheriff's detective named Mike Gamberg, who had lived in Plumas County during the time of the murders and had never forgotten the case, was assigned to revisit the investigation upon his return to the department after retirement. Gamberg approached the case with fresh eyes and the benefit of modern forensic techniques. He began by recovering all available physical evidence from storage and sending items for advanced DNA testing that hadn't been available in 1981. He also tracked down and re-interviewed witnesses, many of whom had never been thoroughly questioned during the original investigation. One of Gamberg's most significant discoveries came from a simple piece of evidence that had been overlooked for decades. A hammer recovered from a pond near Keddie shortly after the murders had been deemed unrelated to the case and subsequently forgotten. Gamberg found documentation of this hammer and realized it matched the description of the one Martin Smart had reported missing. Even more tellingly, the pond where it was found was along the route Smart and Bubaid would have taken when leaving town after the murders. Another breakthrough came when Gamberg interviewed Marilyn Smart's therapist, who revealed something startling. According to the therapist, Martin Smart had confessed to killing Sue Sharp but denied killing the others. The therapist had reported this information to the original investigators, but for reasons unknown, it had never been thoroughly followed up on. In 2016, a cadaver dog was brought to the site where Cabin 28 had stood. Despite the passage of 35 years and the demolition of the structure, the dog alerted to the presence of human remains near what would have been the cabin's back steps. Subsequent excavation discovered a buried bloody knife that forensic experts believed could have been one of the murder weapons. Adding to these developments, a handwritten anonymous letter was discovered in case files that had apparently been sent to the Plumas County Sheriff shortly after Tina Sharp's remains were found. The letter contained details about the disposal of Tina's body that only the killer would have known. Handwriting analysis suggested Martin Smart may have been the author. Unfortunately, both Martin Smart and John Bubaid had died by this time, Bubaid in the late 1980s and Smart in 2000. This meant that even with mounting evidence pointing to their involvement, they could never be brought to justice. However, Detective Gamberg publicly stated his belief that the case had essentially been solved, with Smart and Bubaid as the primary perpetrators. The motive, according to Gamberg's theory, aligned with early suspicions. Martin Smart had apparently blamed Sue Sharp for encouraging his wife Marilyn to leave him. In a jealous rage, possibly fueled by alcohol and drugs, Smart and Bubaid had gone to Cabin 28 to confront Sue. The situation escalated to violence, with John and Dana becoming collateral victims when they tried to defend Sue. Tina, the theory suggested, was taken from the cabin either because she witnessed the crimes or as part of a previously harbored inappropriate interest Smart allegedly had in the young girl. The Keddy murders left an indelible mark on everyone connected to the case. For the surviving Sharp children, life would never return to normal. Sheila Sharp, who discovered the bodies that Sunday morning, has spoken publicly about her decades-long struggle with post-traumatic stress disorder. The images of what she found in Cabin 28 have never left her. Despite this burden, Sheila eventually married and had children of her own, demonstrating remarkable resilience. Rick and Greg Sharp were raised by relatives, growing up with the knowledge that their family had been torn apart by an act of senseless violence. Both boys, too young at the time to fully comprehend what had happened, would later learn the horrific details of that night in Keddy. Each found their own ways to cope with this legacy. The extended Sharp family never gave up hope for justice. They attended memorial services for Sue, John, and Tina, keeping their memories alive while waiting for answers that were painfully slow in coming. Family members maintained contact with investigators over the years, ensuring that the case would not be forgotten. For the community of Keddy, the murders marked the beginning of the end for the once charming resort. Tourism declined sharply after news of the crime spread. Visitors could not separate the beautiful mountain setting from the horrific events that had occurred there. Cabin rentals dropped off, and eventually, the resort closed altogether. By the early 2000s, most of the original structures had been demolished, including Cabin 28 itself. The case profoundly affected law enforcement in Plumas County as well. Officers who responded to the scene that day carried those memories throughout their careers. The sheriff's department faced criticism for aspects of the initial investigation, leading to changes in how major crimes were handled in the rural county. The case became a cautionary tale about the importance of properly securing and processing crime scenes, even in remote locations. The Keddy murders also entered popular culture, inspiring books, documentaries, and even horror films. Most notably, the 2008 film, The Strangers, drew elements from the Keddy case, though it fictionalized many details. In 2016, a documentary series titled Cabin 28, The Keddy Murders, brought renewed attention to the case, coinciding with Detective Gamberg's reinvestigation. For decades, amateur sleuths and true crime enthusiasts have debated theories about what happened in Cabin 28. Internet forums dedicated to the case have thousands of posts analyzing every detail of the evidence. Some family members have expressed gratitude for this continued interest, hoping it might eventually lead to definitive answers, while others have found it painful to have their family tragedy become a subject of public fascination. In recent years, the property where Keddy Resort once stood has been redeveloped. New vacation homes now occupy the land, many of their owners unaware of the location's dark history. The forest has reclaimed parts of the old resort grounds, nature's way of healing a landscape marked by human tragedy. Yet for those who remember, the echoes of that April night in 1981 never fully fade. Each spring, as wildflowers bloom in the meadows around where Cabin 28 once stood, locals still speak in hushed tones about the night that changed their mountain community forever. While Detective Gamberg's reinvestigation pointed strongly toward Martin Smart and John Bubaid as the perpetrators, some questions about the Keddy murders remain unanswered. These lingering mysteries continue to haunt those connected to the case and intrigue those who study it. One persistent question involves the potential role of others in the crimes. Some investigators have suggested that Smart and Bubaid may not have acted alone. The level of violence in the cabin, coupled with witness statements about multiple cars seen near Cabin 28 that night, has led to theories that additional perpetrators might have been involved. Another mystery concerns the boys who slept through the murders. How did Rick, Greg, and Justin remain unharmed while such violence occurred just one room away? Some have theorized that the killers specifically avoided harming the children, perhaps because one of the perpetrators had a connection to Justin Smart. Others suggest that the attacks were executed with enough stealth initially that the boys simply didn't wake up until the violence had ended, and the killers then chose to leave them unharmed. The handling of Tina Sharp's remains presents another puzzle. Why was she taken from the cabin and transported approximately 100 miles away? If the motive for the murders was indeed Martin Smart's anger at Sue Sharp, why was Tina singled out in this way? Some investigators believe this supports the theory that Smart had an inappropriate interest in the young girl, while others suggest it might have been a calculated attempt to complicate the investigation. The role of local law enforcement in the initial investigation has also come under scrutiny. Some family members and journalists have raised questions about whether the original investigation was deliberately compromised. These theories suggest that connections between suspects and local officials might have influenced how thoroughly certain leads were pursued. While no concrete evidence supports these claims, the acknowledged missteps in the early investigation have fueled such speculation. Another theory that has emerged over the years involves potential connections to drug trafficking in the area. Plumas County's remote location made it attractive to marijuana growers and drug distributors in the early 1980s. Some have suggested that the Sharp family might have inadvertently become entangled in this underground economy, either by witnessing something they shouldn't have or by being mistakenly targeted. What we do know with reasonable certainty is that the attack was not random. The level of violence suggests personal animus, particularly towards Sue Sharp. The fact that the perpetrators knew to target Cabin 28 specifically, rather than any of the other nearly identical cabins in the resort, indicates familiarity with the victims or their location. We also know that this was not a robbery gone wrong. Nothing of value was taken from the cabin, and the disorganized crime scene lacked the characteristics of a planned home invasion. Instead, the evidence points to a crime of passion, violence fueled by anger, jealousy, or other intense emotions. DNA evidence analyzed during the reinvestigation revealed that blood found on a pillow in Cabin 28 matched neither the victims nor any of the identified suspects. This suggests that at least one of the attackers was injured during the struggle, potentially by John or Dana as they fought to defend themselves and Sue. This unidentified DNA profile remains in databases, waiting for a potential match that could finally bring definitive answers. The story of the Keddy murders reminds us that behind every true crime case are real people whose lives were forever altered by violence. The Sharp family, Sue, John, Tina, Sheila, Rick, and Greg, were not characters in a mystery novel but human beings with hopes, dreams, and futures that were either cut short or profoundly changed on that April night in 1981. The reinvestigation led by Detective Gamberg has provided some measure of closure to the surviving family members. While Martin Smart and John Bubaid went to their graves without facing justice in a courtroom, the evidence uncovered decades after the crime strongly suggests their culpability. For many connected to the case, this represents at least a partial answer to questions that haunted them for most of their lives. The passage of time has not diminished the impact of this case on those who survived it. Sheila Sharp, now in her 50s, has spoken about how discovering her family members' bodies shaped the course of her entire life. In interviews, she has described how everyday events can trigger memories of that morning, the sound of rain on a roof, the creak of a wooden floor, the particular quality of light filtering through pine trees. Yet she has also spoken about finding ways to honor her mother and siblings by living a full life despite the trauma she experienced. Rick and Greg Sharp have largely avoided public attention, choosing to process their family's tragedy privately. Friends report that both men have found ways to build lives that acknowledge their past without being defined by it, perhaps the most one can hope for after experiencing such profound loss at a young age. For the community around Keddy, the passage of years has brought physical changes but not erasure of memory. Though the cabins are gone and new structures stand in their place, longtime residents still reference locations in relation to where Cabin 28 once stood. The murders have become part of local folklore, stories told to newcomers to explain why older residents still lock their doors in this otherwise peaceful mountain community. True crime researchers continue to study the Keddy case for insights into investigative methods, the psychology of violence, and the impact of brutal crimes on small communities. The case serves as both a warning about the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of everyday life and a testament to the enduring human desire for truth and justice, even when decades pass without answers. As our story comes to a close, the rain continues to fall gently outside your window. The mysteries of Keddy Cabin May 28 never be fully resolved to everyone's satisfaction. Some questions will likely remain unanswered. Yet the effort to understand what happened that night, the dedicated work of investigators like Mike Gamberg, the courage of survivors like Sheila Sharp in speaking about her experiences, and even the interest of those who learn about the case decades later, ensures that Sue, John, and Tina Sharp are not forgotten. Their lives mattered. Their story matters. And in remembering them, we honor all those whose lives have been touched by violence and those who seek justice on their behalf. As you drift toward sleep, carry with you not just the mystery of this case but the reminder that even in the darkest stories, there are elements of human resilience and the enduring search for truth. Our background sounds will carry you into tranquility as you drift toward sleep. Thank you for listening to tonight's true crime story. Rest peacefully, knowing that another story awaits you next time, ready to accompany you on another journey toward restorative sleep. And until next time, stay safe and take care. Good night.